All right, folks, ready to dive into something really interesting. And UPSC aspirants, this one's especially for you. We're talking about India's election commission.
Yeah, there's been a lot of buzz lately about how things are changing over there.
Huge changes. This is the body that makes sure elections are fair in a country with, get this, over 900 million voters.
It's a massive responsibility. They handle everything from voter registration to actually running the polls and then making sure the votes are counted properly. It's a lot.
Absolutely. And they've done a pretty amazing job so far. But recently, there's been a big shift in how they choose their leader, the chief election commissioner.
Definitely a big shift.
So before we get into all the new stuff, can you walk us through how it used to work? How did they pick the chief election commissioner in the past?
Sure. So in the old system, the president of India would appoint the chief election commissioner.
Okay, makes sense. But wasn't the president just following someone else's lead?
Exactly. The president would base their decision on the advice of the prime minister. And to figure out who was next in line, they mostly just looked at seniority among the existing election commissioners.
Seniority, huh? So basically, whoever had been there the longest was most likely to get the top job.
Pretty much.
That's interesting. So, like, if we look at the current commission, we have Rajiv Kumar, Ganesh Kumar, and Sukhbir Singh Sandhu. How would that seniority thing have worked in this case?
Well, in this particular situation, it would come down to their appointment dates. Both Ganesh Kumar and Sukhbir Singh Sandhu joined on the same day, but Ganesh Kumar's name came first in the official announcement.
Ah, so it's all in the fine print.
Exactly. So he'd be considered the senior most in this scenario. When Rajiv Kumar's term ended, Ganesh Kumar would have been the most likely successor.
All right, that makes sense. Seems pretty straightforward. But then, boom, December 2023 rolls around and a new law throws a wrench into the whole system.
Big time. This new law introduces some major changes. No more just relying on seniority and the prime minister's recommendation. Now, there's the search committee, led by the law minister. They're the ones who come up with a short list of 5 potential candidates, not just for the chief election commissioner, but also for the election commissioners.
Wow, so a whole new layer added to the process. So it's not just about who's been around the longest anymore.
Nope, not at all.
But, okay, say this search committee comes up with their list.
Right.
Then what? Who actually makes the final decision?
All right, so that's where the selection committee steps in. They have the final say on who gets appointed. And this committee is made up of the prime minister, the leader of the opposition in the Lok Sabha, the lower house of parliament.
Right, right.
And a cabinet minister. But here's the catch. This cabinet minister is nominated by the prime minister.
Hold on. The prime minister gets to choose someone for the committee that's taking the chief election commissioner. Doesn't that seem like, I don't know, a bit of a potential conflict of interest?
It's definitely raised some eyebrows. And this wasn't just a random change either. It all came about after the Supreme Court got involved.
Oh, wow. So the Supreme Court was involved. This is getting juicy. What happened there?
Well, before this new law, there were a bunch of petitions challenging the old way of doing things.
People weren't happy with just the prime minister calling the shots.
Exactly. They were saying the process wasn't transparent enough and that it could weaken the independence of the Election Commission.
So they were worried the government was having too much influence.
Right. So the Supreme Court stepped in, recognizing that the Election Commission needs to be impartial. They actually set up a temporary system for picking the chief election commissioner and the other commissioners.
Oh, so they took things into their own hands. That's pretty bold.
Yeah.
What did this temporary system look like?
So in their system, the selection committee had the prime minister, the leader of the opposition, and get this, the chief justice of India.
The chief justice. That seems like a much more balanced approach. So then how did we end up with this new law if the Supreme Court had their own system in place?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. The government basically decided to take matters into their own hands and pass this new law, changing the makeup of the committee, even though the Supreme Court was still figuring things out.
So it's kind of like they were saying, thanks, Supreme Court, but we'll handle this ourselves.
Pretty much. And that's where things get really interesting, because during the recent selection committee meeting for the new chief election commissioner, Rahul Gandhi, the leader of the opposition, decided to make his voice heard.
Oh, this is getting good. What did he do?
He submitted a dissent note.
A dissent note. What's that all about?
Basically, he's saying, hold up, everyone. We need to wait for the Supreme Court to finish their review of this new law before we go appointing anyone.
So he's basically pumping the brakes on the whole process.
Exactly. He's arguing that if we proceed with the appointment now and the Supreme Court later decides the law isn't valid, it throws the whole thing into chaos.
Yeah, that would be a mess.
Yeah.
Imagine the new chief election commissioner is all settled in, and then boom, they have to step down because the law they were appointed under is no good,
It would be a huge blow to the government's credibility, and it could really damage public trust in the Election Commission.
which is supposed to be this neutral body overseeing elections fairly.
Right.
It's kind of like building a house on a foundation that might crumble, you know. You don't want to do that.
Exactly. And this whole situation really shows how even small changes in laws can have huge ripple effects. It's not just about the technicalities, it's about the bigger picture of democracy and how power is balanced within a government.
It's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
You tweak one thing, and suddenly you've got this whole cascade of consequences.
That's a great way to put it. And it's something that anyone studying Indian polity, especially those gearing up for the UPSC exams, should pay close attention to. This kind of scenario comes up a lot in those exams.
Oh, absolutely. So UPSC aspirants, listen up. This is the kind of real-world example that can really help you understand those complex concepts they test you on.
Definitely. This whole situation with the Election Commission is a case study in how legal and political battles can play out.
It's like a political thriller in real life.
Exactly. And it highlights how important the role of the judiciary is in upholding democratic principles. The Supreme Court stepping in to ensure the independence of the Election Commission, that's huge.
It's like they're saying, we're here to make sure the game is played fair.
Right. And it's not over yet. The Supreme Court hasn't made their final decision, and that decision could have serious consequences.
Yeah, it's a real cliffhanger. But before we get too caught up in what might happen, I want to take a moment to acknowledge all of our listeners, especially those of you who are hitting the books, studying hard for the UPSC exams.
Absolutely. We know you're out there, putting in the hours.
Your dedication is inspiring, and we want to encourage you to keep at it. And hey, everyone, whether you're a UPSC aspirant or just interested in this topic, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop us a comment below and tell us what you think about this whole situation.
We love a good discussion, so don't be shy.
And if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to show us some love, hit that like button, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this.
We're all about making these complex topics accessible and engaging, so stay tuned for more.
All right, let's get back to this Election Commission saga. We've talked about the new law, the Supreme Court stepping in, Rahul Gandhi throwing a wrench in the gears with his dissent note, and all the potential fallout from all this.
Right. Lots to unpack here.
But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really dug into yet, Rahul Gandhi's dissent note itself.
Yeah, let's take a closer look at what he's actually objecting to. What are his specific concerns?
So, spill the tea. What's Rahul Gandhi so worried about with this new law?
Well, one of his main points is that this whole new setup with the committees and all doesn't really solve the problem the Supreme Court was trying to fix.
Which was?
Making sure the Election Commission is truly independent, free from political influence.
Right, because before it was pretty much the prime minister's pick, right?
Exactly. And Rahul Gandhi saying that even with these committees, the government still has too much control over who gets to be the chief election commissioner.
Because the prime minister gets to choose someone on the selection committee.
Right. It's like, are they really trying to make things more independent, or does it just look that way on the surface?
It's a good question. And this whole back and forth between the government pushing for their way and the Supreme Court trying to make sure things are fair, it's pretty intense.
It really shows you the tension that can exist between different parts of the government, the executive branch, which is the government, and the judiciary, the courts.
And they're both trying to figure out who has the final say when it comes to the election commission.
Exactly. And it's all playing out in this really specific technical change to how they choose the chief election commissioner.
It just goes to show you, even the smallest details in how a government works can have huge consequences.
Absolutely. And for anyone studying how the Indian government functions, especially for the UPSC exams, this is a must-know situation.
UPSC folks, take notes.
This is the real-world stuff that can really trip you up if you're not paying attention.
So for our listeners who are studying for the UPSC, what are the big things they should remember from this whole deep dive? What are the key takeaways?
Well, first off, it shows how the Indian political system is always changing.
Like, it's not enough to just memorize a bunch of facts.
Nope. Laws can be challenged, reinterpreted, even thrown out altogether. You have to understand the history, the debates, the possibility of things changing in the future.
It's like trying to study a moving target.
Exactly. And another crucial takeaway is understanding how power is distributed in the government. We've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and they don't always see eye to eye.
Checks and balances, right?
Yeah.
Making sure no one part of the government gets too powerful.
Right. UPSC exams love to ask about that stuff. And of course, we can't forget the Election Commission itself.
They're the ones in charge of making sure elections are fair.
Right.
Right.
For the UPSC, you have to understand their powers, how they work, the challenges they face.
Because, as we've seen, even a small tweak to their process can have huge consequences.
Absolutely. So much to learn from this whole situation.
It's been quite the journey. We started with a simple change in how they pick the chief election commissioner, and now we're talking about legal battles, political power struggles, and the future of democracy in India.
It makes you realize that democracy is something you have to constantly work at, you know? It takes vigilance, critical thinking, and being willing to have those tough conversations.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, huge thanks to all our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and interesting. If you're loving the show, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.
We love breaking down these complex topics and making them accessible to everyone.
And to all our dedicated UPSC aspirants out there, keep up the hard work. Your dedication is inspiring.
Keep those brains sharp and never stop questioning.
Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and stay curious.